Thank you for your presence as we begin a series entitled Speaking Truth, Seeking Justice, Stepping into the Whirlwind of Israel-Palestine. Tonight we will consider what it has come to mean for faithful and committed persons within Judaism to recognize and to protest abuses from the Israeli government toward Palestinians. It is a remarkable thing, isn't it, that from within your own tradition, you are able to step into another's worldview and see the injustices perpetuated by your worldview onto another. It is like stepping into a whirlwind itself. As Rabbi Hillel reminds us, that which is despicable to you, do not do to your fellow human. This is the whole Torah. Since the events of October 7th were reported, we've all witnessed the rapid escalation of bloody conflict, huge swaths, entire towns and villages in Gaza reduced to rubble, 1 million plus displaced refugees, denial of even limited humanitarian aid and relief. And every one of us here grieves and laments that. And we must somehow try to seek solidarity with our Palestinian friends, brothers, and sisters, and to act, to speak truth, and to seek justice. So a bit of a preview of coming events. On March the 3rd, next month, we're pleased to welcome to the Binkley pulpit as a guest preacher, a friend to Binkley, Reverend Mark Davidson, who is part of tonight's program, I'm pleased to say. Following worship on March the 3rd, we will host a lunch and learn in which we will hear from Ron Shive and Burhan Ghanem. We believe Ron might just be coming back from Israel. Then the following month, on the weekend of April 5, 6, and 7th, we will host a gathering of FOSNA, Friends of Sabeel North America, and its executive director, Jonathan Katab. The Saturday event is a community-wide event in conference format beginning at 9:30. You'll hear more, Binkleyites will hear more about that in coming weeks. And then on Sunday, April 7th, we will welcome Jonathan to the Binkley pulpit. I really am glad that you're here tonight, and it's my pleasure to invite Mary Lou Smith to the podium, who will begin our program. And as she is walking up, would you bathe Mary Lou in love?
I've said to Marcus, and I'd like to say it to you, that being able to plan this series has been one ray of hope and joy for me in this very heartbreaking time. And as I look out here, I'm really reminded of the times that we have gathered here as activists over the years, making posters in this hall and then getting out on Franklin Street and going down to Elon College and being there and protesting. So the spark is still here, and it's growing, and for that I'm grateful. I'm also very grateful for the many Jewish voices here in this country and for the numbers of Jewish organizations that I've been privileged to be a part of in Palestine, with Rabbis for Human Rights out on the fields defending olive trees and homes, and with the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, rebuilding homes as a way of resistance. But now we're experiencing a wonderful growth of Jewish voices in this country, and it's very inspiring and something that we can all give a lot of gratitude for. So this Promised Land Museum is using Israeli voices, Israeli data that Dr. Steven Feldman has put together. And I'll talk a little bit more about the actual museum, but Steve was not able to be with us. He has another speaking engagement tonight. And yet we wanted to launch this museum so that it's available actually right through this whole series. And people can come in and see it, because there's really a lot to it. There are barcodes on here, and the barcodes in each of the panels also leads you to more information. So as a way of introducing Steve, I thought it was best that you hear an interview as he's being interviewed by a radio station.
So I created a museum of Jewish voices, of Israeli historians, Jews, who report the history of how Palestinian families became refugees from their homes, and talk from a truly Jewish perspective morally about what the history is and what the implications of that are.
Stephen, how did you, tell us a little bit about your personal trajectory. How do you come, you're a Jew, obviously, you're an American Jew. Tell us a bit about where you've come from and how you've ended up where you are now, kind of ethno-politically.
Yeah, I'm your basic Jewish American doctor. I grew up in an Orthodox synagogue that my grandfather helped to, and father both had been presidents of the congregation. I went to Orthodox Jewish Hebrew school, a school that my grandfather helped to found. And then I went off to, college and medical school and all that. I have my family in Israel, and my wife has even more family in Israel. And I think I grew up with what you consider the standard Jewish you, that, Jews have every right to, be in Israel and to and support the Jewish state. But in my medical experiences, I found that often people had really weird views about people in other groups. I was in a unique position as a dermatologist in the kind of research I do to talk to insurers and drug company people. And everywhere I looked, there were people who thought they were doing what was best for patients, even though my group thought they were evil. And when I went to Israel, one of my last trips there, one of my wife's relatives was taking us on tours of the country. He would take us everywhere where water was important in the country, which was everywhere. And we're coming over a hill, and I'm looking out over the valleys with farmland and factories and forests that I had helped plant. And it just struck me at that moment, where had Palestinians been living? I mean, if we reclaimed an empty land of swamps and deserts and made it bloom, well, how could there have been so many Palestinian refugees? And so I began to explore, and I found that, my Hebrew school education was very limited and missed a lot of the history. And, I wasn't going to Palestinian sources. I was, with my background, I trusted Israeli Jewish sources. So, I found Israeli Jewish sources telling me that there was a town, Deir Yassin, where we had, committed atrocities. I didn't know that. And then I learned there was a second town, Safsaf, and then I learned there were actually hundreds of towns from which we expelled entire villages of peaceful families from their homes. And, that was based on Israeli Defense Force documentation. And so another thing I had learned in dermatology was the extent to which our thinking depends on the context in which we see it. For example, this blue vein of mine. It's not blue. There's nothing blue in the blood. I get blood at the Red Cross every 2 months. It's red. Why is it blue? Well, it's not blue. If you take away the surrounding skin, you'll see that it's flesh color, maybe a bluer shade of flesh color, but flesh color. But if you look at it, your eye will still see blue. Similarly, if you don't understand the context for what happened in 1948, you know, you could understand how people's views would be very different.
Sure. Okay.
So I created a museum with this information.
So what does the museum contain, roughly? I mean, is it a very briefly, what's in the museum? It's not a physical building, correct?
Yeah, there's, you know, maybe someday there will be a physical building or possibly the equivalent of a library bookmobile that would take the museum from town to town if necessary. But, you know, in the modern era, I can give people access to the museum's resources by having it be online, also by having a series of 6 foot tall, 2.5 foot wide banners that have the contents, the major, really the highlights of the museum that I can send off to, you know, groups. They've been in Canada, and people can take them around and put them up at events. And you could see things like the documentation from an Israeli prime minister that he personally oversaw the expulsion of 50 to 70,000 Palestinian men and women and children from the towns that later became the Tel Aviv airport.
Steve, okay, I got it. I guess your drift. Two questions arise. First of all, how are you received by your first of all, the closest people to you, your Jewish friends and neighbors? I think I can guess what the World Zionist Organization thinks about what you're doing. But what about the Jews that you talk to? What kind of reaction do you get from them?
Yeah, I think it's mixed. You know, one of my best friends growing up through childhood, you know, when we first started talking to him about this, he's like, no way. And then he comes back to me later and he's like, you know what? You know, I think I've come around to seeing things more your way. I think President Trump was a big help in this regard because I think a lot of progressive people thought anything he said was bad. And I think that opened them up to the possibility. I think President Trump was the biggest help to changing at least the views of liberals or progressives on equal treatment for Palestinian families. Mm-hmm. You know, at the other extreme, we have you know, an extraordinarily progressive rabbi in the town I live in, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. A guy who wears a rainbow-colored tallis and strums a guitar during, you know, synagogue, and he'll be on the front line standing for transgender people to use whatever bathroom they want, you know, officiating a gay wedding, no problem. Right. But when it comes to support for Israel, he's right there supporting Israel when Israel is blowing up apartment buildings in Gaza and killing scores of men, women, and children. And you know, he would be totally antithetical to what I'm saying at this point. But again, he sees the vein as blue. You know, he can't see past the context that he was brought up in yet.
Right.
But I'm sure it will happen. It's a one-way street. You know, you don't start with believing in equal treatment for everybody and then say, no, I only believe in equal treatment for Jews. Mm-hmm. But you do go from, you know, I support Israel to I support, you know, peace, justice, and equality for both Jewish and Palestinian families.
What kind of traffic do you get? Do you have some metrics about how you're growing? How long has the museum existed? And what's indications do you have about your trajectory? Yeah,
the museum has been in existence for about 5 years, and the trajectory has been very slow. Growth has been very slow, I think because nobody likes it. Mm-hmm. You know, on the one side, you've got, people who support Israel. They don't think they're anti-Palestinian, but they know they support Israel, and they're not particularly interested in challenging their ideas. And at the other extreme, I think I've suffered, and my museum has suffered, from progressive groups not wanting to promote the idea of a Jewish museum of the Palestinian experience because they want to get people to listen to Palestinian voices.
Right.
Which, I'm totally supportive of that, but I think the first step in getting people to listen to Palestinian voices is to get them to listen to voices that they already trust, like Jewish Israeli historians and Jewish documentation showing that we expelled entire villages of peaceful families from their homes. I got a copy in the museum of the history of the Haganah, the proto-Israeli Jewish army. And in it, the war plans specifically call for expelling entire villages of families from their homes, destroying the villages, and planting mines in the debris. Growing up, they taught us we Jews begged Palestinians to stay, but they left to further the cause of killing Jews. I don't think the idea that we begged them to stay is consistent with our war plans calling for the destruction of expelling the entire population, destroying the villages, and then mining the debris. And in fact, one of the things that I learned, in part through learning about Canada Park in Israel, was the fact that those trees that I helped plant when I was a kid, thinking I was, reclaiming the desert, were actually planted over the remains of Palestinian villages to
That gives you an idea that indeed the Palestine, the Promised Land Museum is one that gives a lot of data from Israeli sources, and it's going to need some time. So we are going to offer to have some small group viewings on Thursday mornings in Lent. Of course, you can come in and, let's see, we've decided 11 o'clock, didn't we? Yeah. And you can come in at any time, of course, and it's pretty self-sufficient in the sense that the barcodes are on there and you can spend some time and really delve into the data that's there. Also, on the shelf over on the side, there are other books and materials which are also Jewish or Israeli voices, but there are a number of other resources, and you're welcome to take any of the materials in a lending library kind of idea. I'd love to share a wealth of wonderful sources. So do make see what fits into your pattern and your interests, and if you want any information, let me know. There are some bags from the Promised Land Museum on the counter as well, so help yourself and enjoy that. I'm so pleased that I could partner with Mark Davidson in putting this series together, and Mark is the Executive Director of Voices for Justice in Palestine. And I want to ask him to join you all.
Good evening, friends. It's so good to be back to Binkley. It's good to be here with Marcus and with Mary Lou, my longtime friend and collaborator in this work. Let me just say a brief word about Voices for Justice in Palestine. First, I'd like to recognize the chair of our board, Burhan Ganayem, in the back. Burhan, please raise your hand, and his lovely wife, Manar, is with him. And Lee Mortimer is the treasurer of our board, and so please, well, and his wife Karen. Good to have you all with us. And my wife Allison, right there. I just want to say one thing about Steve Feldman. He's my dear friend. I love the Jewish moral core in that man. It really comes through. I think you'll see that. And I do want to say one or two more things about Voices for Justice in Palestine, and then I'd like to prep this next film that you will see from the Jewish Voice for Peace. This clip is really powerful. I sometimes get them confused, VJP and JVP, but Voices for Justice in Palestine has three main foci, and they are education, legislative advocacy, and media work. We are regularly doing webinars and educational events like this. We have a speakers bureau with highly qualified speakers, and it's wonderful to partner with a local church like Binkley, which has a progressive trajectory, and to learn from them and also to share our resources. We've been active participants in the efforts to get our local municipalities to sign on to ceasefire resolutions. We've been active presence at the rallies nearly every Sunday afternoon in downtown Raleigh. And we have worked to pressure Valerie Fouché and Wiley Nickel and Deborah Ross, all of our local representatives, many of whom have been very slow to embrace not only Palestinian justice, but certainly the ceasefire resolutions. We're glad that the pressure that came, I'd say, largely from the Jewish Voice for Peace young people in their passion to move Valerie Fouché away from intransigent to at least fairly supportive of a ceasefire perspective. We still have a lot of work to do with Deborah Ross and with Wiley Nickel and Don Davis and the others. Alma Adams in Charlotte has been pretty good, and we keep working with them, building the relationship. The third thing is media, and Jerry Marketos is the chair of our media committee. We're regularly putting LTEs in letters to the editor and op-eds in the local paper. They don't take us as often as we'd like them to take us, but they certainly know we're there, and even if they don't publish them, we're convinced that the editors read them. And so it helps move the needle in terms of awareness on these issues. One thing that I specifically want to call your attention to, this table here has plenty of our brochures. Please take them. I'd like not to take any of them home. I'd like to know they're in your hands. There's also a dozen or so hand-carved olive wood creches from Palestine, and we would be happy to have you take one of those for $5 as the suggested donation, and all the proceeds will go to starving and homeless and under constant bombardment families in Gaza, and the money will go to UNRWA to help them in that way. And if you feel moved to offer more, it will go directly to UNRWA. So we are grateful for any help you can give. All right, enough of that. Again, it's great to be with you. This particular very short introduction from the Jewish Voice for Peace group does a wonderful job of countering the thing that many of us have heard. Oh, this issue is so complicated. What our Jewish Voice for Peace friends have fashioned in this particular short clip is a eloquent retort to the view that this is just too complicated. So I hope you'll enjoy that, and then I'll briefly introduce Tema, who is our featured speaker. So,
what would happen if you built a refuge for a persecuted people in a place where another people already lived? In the next few minutes, you'll learn why this moral quandary is at the root of the struggle between Israelis and Palestinians, and what you can do to help achieve a just peace for everyone in the region. First, there are a couple of things it's helpful to understand. One, many Jews fled harsh persecution in anti-Semitic Europe, especially the Nazi Holocaust. Zionists encouraged massive immigration to historic Palestine, at that time a British colony, where Jews had an age-old connection and where small Jewish communities had long existed among larger groups of indigenous peoples. But when the UN offered the Jewish immigrants the majority of the land for a new state called Israel, for the indigenous Palestinians who lived there, it was a massive destruction of life. They rejected the UN's partition plan and several Arab states invaded the new state of Israel. Israeli forces essentially erased over 400 Palestinian villages and towns. By the end of the fighting, Israel controlled 78% of historic Palestine. And when 750,000 Palestinians who fled or were expelled during fighting tried to return to their homes where the new state now stood, they were permanently barred by the Israeli government. While over 100,000 of their relatives and neighbors who hadn't left became second-class citizens of the new state, along with the new Jewish majority. Today, Palestinian refugees and their descendants number in the millions. Most are in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and Jordan. Many are spread throughout the world, with millions still living in refugee camps, seeking to return to their homeland. To sum up, one group of refugees found a much-needed home, but in the process, a new group of refugees was created. Here's the second thing to understand. Israel was founded as a Jewish state. But now ask yourself, what exactly does that mean? People had lots of ideas about what a Jewish state should look like. Some called for equality for all citizens. But what was created, in practice, was institutional discrimination against non-Jews. In other words, Israel ended up being built on a blueprint of exclusion. The Israeli government wants maximum land and resources for Jews, but not the Palestinians living there. That's why, inside Israel, Jews get special privileges, including rights to land and housing, that are denied to the Palestinian citizens, who make up 20% of Israel's population. That's also part of why Israel has never defined its borders. In fact, they still hold on to land, the West Bank and Gaza, that they conquered in the war in 1967. Since then, Israel has built Jewish settlements throughout the occupied West Bank, building Jewish-only cities and supplying them with infrastructure like roads and army camps, schools, and even a college. Military occupations are meant to be temporary, but after 40-plus years, this one looks permanent and entirely unjust. In the West Bank, Israeli Jewish settlers and Palestinians live on the same land, but must live under two completely separate and unequal systems of Israeli law. The Jewish settlers dominate the natural resources, including water and agricultural land, and they're backed by the Israeli army. To maintain the occupation, Israel has demolished thousands of Palestinian homes and orchards, confiscated Palestinian land, bombed a captive civilian population in Gaza, and punished resistance with raids, arrests, and assassinations, all to gain maximum land while making life so difficult for Palestinians that they will either leave or be too afraid to resist. Palestinians have fought back. For decades, they tried to achieve national liberation through armed struggle. Some groups still do, but the majority now support popular protest instead. The deeply harmful pattern of control, repression, and violence profoundly harms Palestinians living under occupation and Israelis living as occupiers. This must be broken to reach a peaceful and secure future for both peoples. Now that you understand the problem, what about the solution? What about peace talks? So far, over 2 decades of U.S.-backed peace talks have actually made things worse by helping Israel continue the occupation. It's been years of talking while Israel massively expanded the Jewish settlements and literally redrew the map. Peace talks are good if they're real, but not when they're theater to cover a land grab. So now what? The current world superpower, the United States, has been a terrible friend, enabling Israel's destructive and self-destructive expansion onto Palestinian land by funding the Israeli military, the biggest recipient of U.S. foreign aid in the world. But there's another superpower that can make the difference: you. There's a movement with hundreds of thousands of people just like you across the world, including Palestinians and Israelis, protesting, educating, divesting, and boycotting, all to bring nonviolent international pressure on Israel to stop violating human rights of Palestinians. Throughout history, where governments have failed to push for justice, people just like you, like us, have taken the lead and won. Now it's the Palestinians' turn for freedom and justice. We can pressure Israel to end the occupation and the discrimination. We want all people, Jews and Palestinians, to have equality, human rights, and democracy. We can change history. Join us.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Tema Okun to you. I first met Tema about 20 years ago when she was involved in working with the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. And I remember at the time being very impressed with her passion for justice and her strong sense of ethics and moral values. Some time passed between that experience to when she came to lead a workshop on dismantling racism, which we offered at the Church of Reconciliation where I was pastoring. And our congregation had many people who were far down that road and some who were just starting the journey. And it really impressed me that Tema helped everybody, wherever they were on the road, take several steps further down the road toward justice and equity. She's a great facilitator. She spent 35 years working with and for organizations, schools, and community-based institutions as a trainer, facilitator, and coach focused on issues of racial justice and equity. She currently facilitates, consults, coaches, and offers talks for and with leaders and organizations nationwide. She's the author of the award-winning The Emperor Has No Clothes, Teaching About Race and Racism to People Who Don't Want to Know, and also the widely used article, White Supremacy Culture. Tema is a member of the Triangle chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace. She lives in Carborough. She's an artist, a poet, and a writer. And she says her current project is deepening her ability to love her neighbor as herself. She is finding the instruction easy and the follow-through challenging, given how we live in a culture that is afraid to help us do either or both. I've always learned a lot being in Tema's presence, and I know you will too. We're very fortunate to have her share with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming Tema Okun.
It's really wonderful to be here, to see so many familiar faces, as we have all grown old together, many of us. So I'm going to start with a poem. My tears are crying, I am drowning. No longer wandering in the wilderness, we have become the Pharaoh. Centuries of sacred celebration and suffering, sunk into strident subjugation, the mirror is cracking. My despair is desperate, I am trembling. Our prayers so full of longing mock us. We chant in the shade of a homeland, shuddering for half a century the lives of humans we push out of sight behind prison walls. My anger is angry, I am shaking. Our silence grows deadly with the deal we've made to defend our hearts from knowing they love their children, their laughter, their lives as much as we do. My rage is raging, I'm bent over. Jewish godmother to an exuberant Palestinian boy, now a man. My love for him a kind of genesis, his love for me a kind of grace. He would hate us otherwise, not any kind of anti-Semitism, consequences for making of him a demon and discarding him daily in the dust of so many, too many checkpoints. My trauma is traumatized, I am broken. We condemn them for making corpses of our children as we make corpses of theirs. The math of it is bleeding us dry. My people, my Jewish people, I don't know how to reach you. Our fear is afraid and forgets we are the ones settling, seizing, sequestering. We pile fear upon fear like stacks of rubble from houses demolished, dreams destroyed for decades. My grief is grieving, I am wailing. We did not outlive the horrors of Holocaust to hoard survival like this, to hollow ourselves out. Or did we? My people, my Jewish people, tell me it is not too late to choose another way. So I want to tell you a little bit about my background and how I became anti-Zionist as a Jew. So I grew up in Chapel Hill. My father was the son of Jewish immigrants who came from Belarus to Brooklyn in the turn of the last century, and he grew up there with his brother and met my mother, who grew up in Texas, was not Jewish, was Methodist, or Methodist, as she would say. And then they had my brother, and then they had me, and moved to Chapel Hill, where my father was a professor in the Department of Public Health for his whole career. And so we grew up here, and he understood himself. He was not a religious man. I like to joke that he was a fundamentalist atheist. He really believed in intellectual rigor and science. He was not at all religious. His parents weren't religious either. His parents were actually communists in the period when they were in Brooklyn. But he understood himself as Jewish, nonetheless. And I didn't know my mother's family because we were estranged from her because she had married a Jew and they did not accept him. So I grew up understanding myself as Jewish, but very, I understood about the holidays a little bit, it was a understanding that I belonged to this community, but not based on any kind of religious education. And in fact, my parents, what they did do is they helped to found the community church as a non-denominational church to support Charlie Jones, who was a Presbyterian minister who'd been kicked out of his church for preaching integration. And I remember going to the community church, and a law professor named Dan Pollitt would teach Sunday school and give us law cases, and that was my religious education. But then I got married to a man who is known as a high holiday Jew. He had a religious education. He was bar mitzvahed, but his family really only went on the high holidays. And he had drifted away from Judaism. And in our 40s, we decided we wanted to have more of a religious and spiritual grounding in our lives. So we decided to reclaim or revisit Judaism as a place to come home. And we took it very seriously. We studied really hard. We joined a synagogue. We started a Talmud study group in the synagogue. I did the synagogue's newsletter. We went to all kinds of education opportunities. I finally read the Bible for the first time, and I was ecstatic. I was ecstatic to find this religion that was so aligned with my social justice values, and a religion that taught that the highest thing that we can do is tikkun olam, which is to heal the world. And I felt like, I could breathe, I could come home, I could develop a relationship with the divine and with God in the structure of Judaism, which was holding me in these beautiful values. So at that point in my journey, my husband's college friend, who's a Palestinian American, invited us to go on a delegation to Palestine. This was in 2002, right after the Second Intifada, and we were the first Westerners to get in after the Second Intifada. And to say that I was ignorant about Palestine does not begin to describe it. And I am telling you something that I am not at all proud of, but I thought Palestine was people living in tents in the desert. I had no idea that it was a culture. I had no idea that there were towns and universities. I had no idea about anything. So coming to Israel and then going to Palestine was just a complete education at once. Because not only was I learning about the rich history and culture of Palestine, I was also witnessing with my own eyes not the severity that we're seeing happen in Gaza, but a precursor of that. Israel had come in and destroyed a lot of the government buildings. They had demolished a lot of homes. They had killed a lot of innocent people. They had bombed holes through walls of houses while people were sleeping in them to be able to go through one house from the next house as they were connected. I saw chicken wire put over old city markets so that Jewish settlers who had taken over the upper floors so that the Palestinians still trying to sell their wares in the market wouldn't be affected by the trash that the settlers were throwing down on them. I saw horrific, horrific things. And in the culture of ministry, I remember seeing the Israeli soldiers had taken it over. They had shat in the drawers. They had peed on the furniture. They had graffitied the Israeli Star of David on the walls. And all of that just started to break me open. And I think the thing, though, of all the things that I witnessed, the thing that was hardest was going through the checkpoints. Because when you go through the checkpoints, they are peopled by young, 18-year-old Israeli soldiers, men and women, who have the power to say whether a Palestinian can or cannot pass. But not just a Palestinian, sometimes hundreds of Palestinians waiting in the sun, old men, old women, pregnant women, sick people, children, waiting while these young people with rifles slung over their shoulders lean casually against the side of the building, deciding whether or not they're going to let people pass. And that's when I knew that my people, the Jewish people, were in big trouble, as I saw the internalization by these very young people of this sense of superiority and disdain for a whole people. That was the thing that was most terrifying to me. And so I came home, we both came home, and we wanted to share what we had seen and witnessed and what we learned about the occupation with our synagogue, and we were not allowed. And so when I came back, so there was this sort of horror of what I saw that Israel was doing in my name, in our name. And then there was the second horror of coming back to the silencing. So this synagogue that we had given our heart and soul to forbid us from sharing anything, and we found no synagogue wanted to hear what we had to say. Mark's church invited us. There were lots of churches that invited us to come and speak, but there was not a single synagogue that wanted to hear from us. And that's what I understood, that part of what was going on, part of the way that Zionism works, that the state of Israel works, is to say that you cannot, to be a good Jew, you cannot criticize what Israel is doing. Because to criticize what Israel is doing is anti-Semitic, and it's hateful, and it's dangerous, and so you can't do it. And not only can you not do it, but no rabbi should allow you to do it, no synagogue should allow you to do it. And so there was this also this this way in which Israel's committing human rights violations, and I would call it, I started to refer to it as Jim Crow on steroids. So it was creating an apartheid state in front of our very eyes, and we were not allowed to talk about it. And then I started to notice that people close to me, Jews close to me, who I wanted to talk to about it, said, no, don't talk to me about it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. No. Relatives, friends. And so we started to lose people because the narrative and the tapes and the instructions about the silence were so ingrained in mainstream Jewish synagogue spaces that people were unwilling and afraid to hear. And it made sense to me, because I thought about the sense of betrayal I felt when I saw with my own eyes what Israel was doing. And if you don't tell me about it, then I don't have to know, and I don't have to feel betrayed. So in a weird kind of way, I understood it. And on one of those journeys, on the first trip, our guide was a man named Yahya Abu Sharif, and the second trip that's when I met Mary Lou, and we reunited with Yahya, and he had a son, Samer, who we met when he was 9. He's now 30. He's my godson. I went to his wedding in Palestine last April, and he's having a child. I hope to be able to go, I don't know, in March. So I've gone back many, many times, and Mary Lou and I were saying, each time I go back, I would say I didn't think it could get worse, and every time I go back, it gets worse. And so that's a little bit about my story. I wanted to just add a little something to the history. That it's so great that you have this history available to you, and what we saw here. I wanted to say a few things that some people don't know, because I want to talk to you about what Zionism is and then talk to you about why I'm an anti-Zionist. So Zionism, which is the idea that the only way that Jews need a state, there needs to be a Jewish state in order for Jews to be safe, started before Nazi Germany, before the World War II, and was conceived of by a man named Theodor Herzl. I will also tell you that as long as there has been talk about Zionism and whether it's good for the Jews, there's been anti-Zionism, and people saying, no, it's not good for the Jews. So it was a very lively debate before the State of Israel and even after the State of Israel was created. And it was conceived by Herzl as a solution to the anti-Semitism in Europe and across the globe. And his thought was that that Jews needed to have a settler colonial state like everybody else in order to be safe. And it was conceived by Herzl as a settler colonial project from the very beginning. And settler colonialism requires dominance. So it was built into the idea of it. And the other thing that I want you to understand is that the Western nations were very, very happy to say, yes, we're going to give you this land that's not ours to give. We're going to give you this land, Jews. We're going to give you the land because now that means your refugees won't come to our countries. We don't want you here. So it's based in Israel. The formation of Israel on the land of Palestine is a result of the anti-Semitism of the U.S. and most European nations who didn't want Jewish refugees. So yeah, we'll put you on this land. You deal with the Palestinians. It becomes your problem now, and we don't have to take so many of you. But Zionism was also a very hotly debated topic, as I said, particularly among Jews here in the U.S. who felt that establishing a Jewish state would make it harder to assimilate and would threaten the idea that Jews could also be Americans, right? So if there's a Jewish state, then why are you still here, Jews? You should go and be in your Jewish state. And I'm going to reference the statement that Biden made 3 or 4 weeks ago, where he said out loud, I couldn't believe he said this, that Israel is the only place that Jews can be safe. He said that when, how many Jews live in the U.S.? He was basically telling us Israel is the only place you can be safe. Very strange. And the other thing to know is that the U.S. was not interested in Israel at all until Israel won. So there was no funding, there was no support. It's like, again, you take care of your people. We don't want to deal with you. But when Israel won the '67 war, the U.S. woke up and went, oh, here's a military ally for us in the Middle East. And that's when the funding started. And that's when the idea of Zionism as the trope that needed to be supported by the Jewish mainstream in the U.S. really took hold. That's when sort of Zionism and Judaism started to become synonymous. And as it started to become synonymous, Zionist leaders began spinning a very carefully crafted and widely distributed narrative about Palestinians as other, as enemy, as terrorist, and this idea that in order for Jews to be safe, Jews need to be absolutely loyal to the idea of Israel and Israel itself, that dissonance and truth-telling about what establishing a Jewish state would mean in terms of the violation of human rights and civil rights for Palestinians mustn't be talked about. The occupation mustn't be talked about. The apartheid system mustn't be talked about. The establishment of illegal settlements mustn't be talked about. And the daily violation of people must not be talked about. And if talked about, if it's ever talked about, it has to be talked about as justified in order for Jews to be safe. So that's the catch. And so that leads us to where we are today, where our tax dollars, billions of our tax dollars, are being used to fund what Israel is doing, when Israel is being led, in my view, by essentially the Trump equivalent, and the irony of Biden sending all this money to the Trump equivalent in Israel. And Israel is being led and directed by ultra-right, far-right interests. And the goal, which they have said out loud and are very explicit about, is to erase Palestinians off of the land from the river to the sea. And I'm not exaggerating. This is what they are saying out loud. And we're funding that. That's what we're funding. So that's why I'm anti-Zionist. Because every Jewish person I know who is anti-Zionist has taken this position because they feel, I feel, we feel that Zionism and the ways in which Israel acts to maintain its position as a Jewish state is a betrayal of everything Jewish. It's a betrayal of what it means to be Jewish. It's the opposite of tikkun olam. We are not healing the world. We are committing genocide. It is the opposite of what it means to be Jewish. Every Jewish person I know who is anti-Zionist carries a lot of grief about what Israel does in our name in order to exist. I wish I could say that Gaza is an anomaly. I mean, it certainly is the most brutal example of what Israel feels compelled to do with the support of our government. They couldn't keep doing what they're doing if we were not sending them money. And the other thing that people sometimes forget is that Israel has created an apartheid state, not just for people in the West Bank and Gaza, but for any Palestinian within Israel who does not have the same rights as Israeli citizens, and for any Palestinian in exile. And the other reason I'm anti-Zionist, and we are anti-Zionist, is because we can't bear to see how this narrative about Jewish safety is linked to Israel. And the only real safety, none of us, I think this is a question for all of us. What makes us safe, right? And does it make us safe? Are we safe when we put up fences and military people to guard those fences in order to keep those other terrible people out? There's no end to that. There is no safety in that, ever. The only real safety we have is solidarity with Palestinians. That's the only way Jews are safe. It's the only way Jews are Jews. It's the only way to save Judaism. It's the only way to be Jewish, is to be in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Never again means never again for anyone. Never again means never again for anyone. And for us to start to believe, I think the thing that's, so there's two layers of I don't even have the language for it. There's two layers of despair, grief, horror that I experienced. One is or any of us do, I'm sure. One is witnessing, which I force myself to do every day, at least for a little bit, what is actually happening in Gaza, which is a level of brutality I have never witnessed before in my life. And the second, almost as bad, maybe as bad, is the numbers of Jews and the numbers of US citizens who say that it's justified. That's almost worse. What has happened to us? What has happened to us that anybody thinks that this is justified? That's why I'm anti-Zionist. I'm anti-Zionist because the state of Israel and its leaders are using, again, the exact same language and tactics that were used in Nazi Germany. The exact same. You will see, you can, if you want to find it, it's not hard to find, the current Jewish leadership calling Palestinians vermins, animals. One defense minister saying every Palestinian is an enemy. The pregnant women are an enemy, the children are an enemy, the men are an enemy. We have become the enemy. I am and we are anti-Zionists because we recognize that Judaism will never recover from what Israel is doing. The whole world is watching as tens of thousands of men, women, and children are being killed, often in horrible ways. I'm not even going to say all the things you know. And that the misery that Israel is creating is going to haunt us, the Jewish community, for generations. Because look at us here in the US. What the genocide and enslavement that our leaders enacted centuries ago is still haunting us today. And it's not just the trauma that Israel is visiting on Palestinians, the trauma that Israel is visiting on itself. There is no recovering from this. So, that's why I'm anti-Zionist, and I'm proud to be anti-Zionist. And as one of the Jewish Voice for Peace local leaders, Emerson, says, they never feel more Jewish than when they are fighting for Palestine to be free. And that's how I feel. It's like there's the only future for me as a Jew is to be in solidarity with the Palestinian people. That's the only future I see. So I'm begging you, I'm literally begging you, because you have to, it's sort of like the analogy I make is if you have a relative who is causing a lot of harm to you or to other people, the response isn't to say, oh, here, let me help you do it even more. If you love them, the response is to stop them. So it is not anti-Semitic to say, Israel, you've got to stop doing this, and U.S., you've got to stop funding it. In fact, it's the most loving, important thing that you can do. So I beg you to find a way to participate. There are these, and I'm sure many of you are already, there are these sheets on the table, and there's some here too, that give you ways to learn more, really trusted sources of information. My most trusted source is Mondoweiss, if people know of that. They will send you, if you sign up, they'll send you a daily email. And organizations and ways to join and ways to act. And I know that Chapel Hill hasn't passed its ceasefire resolution, so you can get involved in helping to do that if you live in Durham. Fantastic action on Monday, and they're going to be talking about it tomorrow, I think. Carborough did pass one. Yay, Carborough. That's where I live. And that's important. It's important that the world, so I talk to my godson 2 or 3 times a week. And I need to be able to tell him, I need to be able to say, Carborough passed a resolution. I need to be able to tell him, I'm going to go talk to Binkley tonight. He needs to hear. He needs to hear that we have his back. So that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
I think we have time for some questions. Not, maybe 10 more minutes? Yes.
Okay, so if anybody have a question? Yes.
What do you say when people say, well, if you're anti-Zionist, because Zionists are advocating for the state of Israel, that Jews should have a state. So you're saying, by being anti-Zionist, this is hypothetical, that Israel, the Jews, should not have a state.
Yes.
How do you respond to that?
I am saying that having a state is not at all good for me or any other Jew. Yes, that's what it means to be anti-Zionist, that having a state, having a Jewish state makes no sense for Jews.
Having a Jewish state, but having a state is okay.
Yeah, well, if you have...
Not having the opposite.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. When people say to me, Israel has a right to exist, I say it may have a right to exist. I don't think it's a good idea, though. It's not about a right to exist or not a right to exist. I mean, it's the U.S. has a right to exist. I mean, what does that even mean? When you create a state that's exclusively for one people, it requires that you dominate or discriminate against other people. It just requires that. And we're not even talking about the racism within Judaism itself. So, it's like, it's not a good idea. And there were many anti-Zionists before the State of Israel was created who argued that very point. And there's a sect of Orthodox Hasidic Jews who will argue you under the table about it because they're so clear. So, yeah, but because their position is you shouldn't put a state before God. Yeah.
Do you see any hope for a two-state solution? Or hope in a
I don't know. My answer is I don't know what the future holds. My hope is that is that the Palestinian people have the ability to decide what it is that they need and want and can negotiate in good faith with whatever the leadership of Israel is. And I think I find it very unsettling to hear Joe Biden or other Western leaders say, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a different, in Gaza, we're going to replace Hamas with a different government. As if, I mean, can you imagine somebody saying, oh, in the United States, in Virginia, we're going to set up a different government, and the people of Virginia have absolutely nothing to do. I mean, it's the erasure of Palestinians as human beings with the right to self-determination is phenomenal at every level. So it's not just physical, but it's even kind of, metaphorical and conceptual. It's a much longer conversation. There's people have floated ideas about confederations, but it's one land. I think it should be, so I'm not the one to say. I think Palestinians should have the right to self-determination. That's what I think.
Yeah. One thing I have heard said by a very considerate woman was there is enough here for everyone in this area, and we just have to find a way to make it work.
Sounds good to me. And in fact, there's a history of, as the film sort of implied, before the partition and before the war, that the Jews and Palestinians did live side by side quite peaceably. Yes.
Tema, could you relate your work on racial justice and equity to your own struggle with Zionism? Thinking about supremacy and how people are raised in supremacist ideas and assumptions, and then how you can help build the seedbed for a multiracial democracy, for tolerance and pluralism and different kinds of education in that way, however you want to go with that.
Sure, 5 minutes, yes.
Yeah.
So Mark's referring to, my life's work has been around teaching about racism, white supremacy, and racial justice. And so when I tell the story about seeing the soldiers and how that was my first real clue about what kind of trouble we were in, it was because I've been doing so much work on the ways in which I, as a white person, and those of us who are white-bodied, are so encouraged to internalize a sense of superiority that we're not even aware of, and how that then plays havoc with our relationships with ourselves and others. So white supremacy, capitalism, oppression, Zionism, these are all projects of disconnect. Their purpose is to disconnect people from each other, from themselves, within community groups, from the land, from God. And so I think, I do think that faith communities have a huge role to play, and reminding us and modeling for us that the most important thing we can do is stay connected. If we were connected, if those Israeli soldiers were at all connected to their bodies, they wouldn't be able to do what they're doing. They're jacked up on who knows what kinds of drugs, and to watch them horrifyingly celebrate the massacres that they're committing. I mean, just think about the level of disconnect that requires, right? And then I see the Palestinian. There's some beautiful. Part of what I witness is beautiful. So there's a Palestinian reporter whose name I should know, but I don't, who sometimes posts pictures of him teaching songs to children. And just this ability to, we are going to stay connected. That's what I see him doing. We are going to stay connected no matter what's happening to us. So to me, my sense of my role at this time is, I'm still an activist, but Jewish Voice for Peace in the Triangle, and it's such an incredibly wonderful organization, and the local chapter is led by such smart and savvy and brave and creative young people. My job is to cheerlead. Yeah, you're doing a great job. And then to remind us whenever I see us start to disconnect that no, we need to stay connected. So I feel like that's my role. I want to stay connected to you. I want to stay connected to my godson. I want to stay connected to the earth and to God and to myself. That's what I want. And so that's in my power to do something about. And it's not enough, but it's what I can do. Yeah.
I hesitate to say anything much, but as a Jew by choice myself, and Libra and I were in Israel in 2003, right after you. We had a similar experience at a checkpoint. We were distressed by that. We met some wonderful Palestinian friends, Mary Lou's, who were incredibly hospitable to us. But we also had some really very wonderful hosts in Israel. We were there to be a part of a conference, etc. Ever since then, we've been passionate about peace in Israel and tried to do what we knew to do to try to help it. At one point, we put our couples therapy skills to work in a kind of technique called communal law, which is to use those skills but in a group. And we had a group here in Chapel Hill that included 2 Palestinians from, one from Jordan and one from Ramallah, who were Hubert Humphrey scholars at UNC. And they were part of the group. We had people from every religious tradition. So there were about 10 of us, 8 or 10 of us. And we met for a number of weeks, and those connections were made. And initially it felt like there was a lot of tension within the group, but it melted away by the end. It was really quite wonderful. But one of our friends who lives in Israel and still lives there, he was in fact head of the antiquities department for the government, said to me once at another thing that was held here at Chapel Hill, the problem is the people on the extremes are not willing to listen to anybody, and that's Hamas. The Hamas people who attacked Israel on the 7th were in that group, and the far-right Zionists in the cabinet of Netanyahu are in that group, and they don't want to talk to each other. And he said, that's the problem. Well, I don't know how you solve that, because the other thing that I'm aware of is that in South Africa, that whole struggle was so like this. And it's happened over and over again all over the world. It's in Somalia, it's in Rwanda. We had a group, one of our group, a peace project group we had, one of the members led a communal between the Hutus and the Tutsis, who were part of the UN delegation after the terrible thing that happened in Rwanda. And they came together too. So it's like, but how do you get there? Because I have a bunch of us who get around and talk every week about the problems of the world, and what we keep coming up with is that humanity is sick, and if from your earliest life, your earliest experience, you've experienced hatred. When we were in Israel, we went through a market one day, and I hesitate to say this too, but one of our Israeli, this particular person I didn't know well, but he was Israeli, he was part of our group, and he commented that these people who were marketing their vegetables, and Palestinians, they were Israeli Palestinians, he called them sand ends. Okay? And he thought we'd like that because we were from the South. Boy, it just made us feel sad, ashamed. And I feel that way now. And during this time, as soon as this happened on the 7th, it just felt so terrible. And I knew what was coming next. It almost makes me feel like that Netanyahu hired some of those people to do that because they want to get rid of everybody in Gaza. But I hesitate to say that, especially in a Jewish audience, because what will happen is all hell will fall on me. Well, on Facebook, if any of you are my Facebook friends, go to where I posted Bernie, I will stop.
Okay.
Senator Bernie Sanders, his position on this, I posted it, there are 50 comments, and a lot of them are Jewish friends telling me how I'm wrong. And I defend myself and the rabbi, with the rabbi and everybody else. But it's very difficult. You have taken an incredibly lonesome road, I think. Thank
Well,
you.
I would say it's not a lonesome road. You know, if you, and I said this to Mary Lou and to Mark too, if you had told me when I started going to Palestine that in 20 years there would be a national organization with hundreds of thousands of Jews that was clearly anti-Zionist, with strong leadership, clear strategy, representing Jews who were completely disaffected with being associated with Israel, I would have said, no, that's not possible. And here we are. So I'm not lonely at all. And I think that, sure, I mean, we can throw our hands up in despair about humans, and I do that at least once a day. But I think that you know, the thing that I try to do is like, where's my locus of control? And I have no say over what Hamas does, but I'm a Jew. And Israel says it's doing this in my name, so that's where my locus of control is. And I'm going to say over and over and over and over again, Israel does not speak for me, not in my name. This is not Jewish. This is not in accordance with Jewish values. This is a shanda, and we should not be doing this. And I know that there are many Jews who are uncomfortable, and if you're uncomfortable, join me. So that's where I have my locus of control, and each of us can do that.